Well, for more detail on his second budget, I spoke to the Treasurer, Kim Wells, at Parliament House. Treasurer, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
You're cutting 4,200 public service jobs over the next 2 years. Is that as thin as the public service can go, or is there room to cut further?
Well, we made an announcement of 3,600 budget update. It's the government's job to ensure that we have an efficient public service. We need to drive efficiencies, so we've announced another 600 today, and we believe that this will happen without any impact on frontline services. But let me make this point. We expect everyone to live within their means, and this budget is about the government living within its means.
But you said previously, when you announced the 3,600 jobs to go, that was as far as the public service can be stretched. Clearly you found room further. Can it be stretched even further than 4,200? We
believe that the 4,200 is the right amount. We have the Better Implementation Services Task Force, and they will be looking at ridding the public service of duplications, the mismanagement in some areas, and it's about providing a quality public service. I think they're doing a fantastic job, but the reality is that there is that duplication in head office staff.
You've previously promised that no frontline staff would go. Since you made that promise, arguably that's been proved to be incorrect. For example, biodiversity officers that stand to lose their jobs. What jobs are categorically safe?
Well, our push has been, from the time we brought down the budget update, is that we will be protecting frontline services across the public sector. And we're pushing as hard as we possibly can to ensure that the frontline services...
But some have gone.
Well, it's the frontline services that we are out there to protect. It's the issue of the back office and the duplication of head office services that we're aiming for. And as I said, this is about being able to live within our means, and the government can no longer afford to go further into debt or to rack up a deficit that was not an option for us.
In your budget forecast, you say that you intend to make similar, if not greater, spending cuts than you have just now over the next 4 years. If you can't hack any further into the public service, where will you make those cuts?
The point I was making, and I'll make it very clear, it is the role of the government to continually monitor and assess the public service and the public sector across the state, and we have an ongoing role to do that. I mean, people expect us to run an efficient public service and public sector, and we intend to do that.
But how?
Well, as we say, we've set up the Better Implementation Services Task Force, and that looks at those duplications and it looks at those areas that we don't need. If there is a unit in Canberra that is doing exactly the same thing here in Victoria, that makes no sense to me.
But you said that you probably can't cut any further than you already have into the public service. If you intend to still make similar spending cuts over the next 3 budgets, where will you make those spending cuts, if not the public service?
Well, there's areas such as the provision of goods and services that governments buy. There's always more efficient ways of doing that. There's the procurement of major projects, or buying trains, or buying this. It's very costly to governments.
So you won't be doing that? You won't be buying any more trains?
Yes, no. I can assure you that we are buying a lot more trains, and we'll make that very clear. But it's the way you purchase the trains, it's the way you purchase your cars, the way you purchase goods and services. I believe there are a lot of room in the way we can make that more efficient in those purchases.
Today you didn't rule out selling public assets or outsourcing public sector services. Are those options on the cards in the next 12 months?
Well, this budget was not about asset sales, so it was not about asset sales, but we have the right as a government to be able to view all of our assets across the board and to make sure that they are efficient and providing good value for the taxpayer. And if it gets to a stage where they're, for example, better in the private hands and that they can operate them more efficiently, especially if they have to compete with other services from other states or overseas, then we need to be able to look at that.
Have you got any earmarked?
No, we're working through a whole heap of processes. As you can imagine, being Treasurer, you receive information and you're assessing the whole time. But in this budget, there are no commitments to sell assets.
And what about outsourcing public services?
Well, as we say over the forward estimates, we have a role to make sure that our public sector, public sector and the public service continues to be efficient. But we will work through the processes and make sure that we get good value for the taxpayer.
At the same time that you're saying those deep spending cuts will have to be made. You've got a $155 million surplus this year, and you're intending to grow that to $2.5 billion in the next 4 years. How can you do that?
Well, it's a matter of, as I said, making sure that government lives within its means.
But how can you find that $2.5 billion?
So we've had to cut expenditure to a situation where the growth over the forward estimates is only 2.9%. So we've been able to bring back that expenditure. By that, we're able to save money, in other words, surpluses, and use that money to be able to pay on frontline services and to build infrastructure. I mean, when we're building a school or a hospital or a road, it's unrealistic to continually go into debt. This is about providing surpluses so we can build those things that the Victorian families need.
But that's a hell of a lot of savings to be found. Do you think you can provide the services and the infrastructure as well at the same time that you're making those spending cuts?
Well, we've already made them. So they're in the budget.
But you haven't made the $2.5 billion yet.
Well, the $2.5 billion surplus is actually in the budget. So those cuts that we have implemented now flow through all the way across to the forward estimates. So that $2.5 billion surplus is actually locked in.
You think that's realistic? It'll stay that way?
Absolutely.
Turning to unemployment, it seems increasingly likely that Qantas will close its 2 maintenance bases in Victoria. Did you fight hard enough to keep those jobs here?
Well, the Assistant Treasurer is dealing with this, and let me say that I spoke to him this morning. They've been having regular conversations and meetings since February this year. Qantas have not made a decision have not made any decisions in regards to the workforce. So we're fighting tooth and nail to save all of those Victorian jobs.
You said this is a tough budget. Your government's already going down in the polls. You're now announcing that fines have increased and jobs are being cut. Do you think Victorians will receive this budget very well?
Look, we've made it very clear all the way that this is going to be a tough budget, but we believe it's a responsible budget.
Kim Wells, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Josie.